Hey everyone, today is going to be a hopefully quick tutorial in how to sculpt a beard. That's how I turned this village people looking G.I. Joe Classified gung-ho into this uh, very dapper looking knight. See if I can get a focus to work. There we go. Um, so first I'll go over the tools you'll need and then we'll actually do the sculpt. Okay, so obviously the first thing you're going to need is a head to sculpt on. I'm going to use this terrible head. I believe it's from an old Kick-Ass figure, but it's trash, so I will never use it for anything else. So I'm going to use it for this. The thing you will need is some sculpting putty. I'm using green stuff putty. This is my preferred stuff to use. You can use stuff like Epoxy Sculpt or anything else that you have. The reason I like using this stuff is because you can change the proportions of the mixture to get a softer result. So normally you would mix 50-50, the blue and the yellow. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use more of the yellow than the blue, because that gives you a finished product that is not quite as rigid, not quite as fragile. So if you're like me and you like to put your figures in extreme poses, if you happen to have his beard going up against his shoulder armor or anything else, by having it a little bit softer, a little bit more flexible, obviously less chance of it cracking or breaking. The other thing you're going to need is some kind of sculpting tool. This is like an actual sculpting tool. I got it as part of like a 6 or 8 pack of different types of tool for about $12 at Michael's. You don't necessarily need to use an actual sculpting tool. This metal point is essentially the same thing as on like a math compass, that sort of thing. That'll work just fine. A plastic, something sharp like this, plastic will work as well. In a pinch, you can use those round toothpicks as well. The problem with those are being wood, they're porous, so there's more chance of your sculpting material getting caught up in them and you pulling more than you want to. You're also going to need water to keep your tool wet. That joke writes itself, so I'm just going to leave that. You will need that a lot more if you're going to be using the toothpicks to sculpt with, a little bit less if you're using something metal. The advantage of the metal is that the sculpting putty doesn't stick to it as much, and even when it does, it's easy to just peel off with your thumbnail. So that's literally everything you need for materials. Water, a tool, and some sculpting putty. Okay, so here we've got our two halves of the sculpting putty. Like I said, normally you'll do 50-50, but in this case I want it a little more flexible, so I'm using more of the yellow, so we're probably about a 60-40. And then what you do is you just mix them together until they're a consistent green, and you're going to want to make sure that your fingers are wet as you're doing this, because the more you work with it, the stickier it's going to get. So you're just going to work that together until it's a consistent green color. Usually takes about a minute and a half, which I'm not going to record the whole thing of me doing this. It's pretty self-explanatory, so we'll come back when it's ready and we can start applying to our figure. Okay, so here's our green stuff ready to go. As you can see, very bright green color. So I'm just going to set that there and hope it doesn't stick. So what we're going to do is we're going to pinch off a little piece of the green stuff, and what we're going to do is we're not doing the whole beard at once. We're going to start just doing this section here. So basically, think of it at this point as not sculpting a beard, but sculpting Wolverine sideburns, basically. So again, make sure that my hands are moist so that green stuff doesn't stick to me. And then I'm going to pinch off this much. This has a working time of about 45 minutes or so. So this is not a problem to just leave it sit for a few minutes. So then, basic shape. Sorry, I'll put it down here where you can see. Bear with me. I'm not used to doing this through a camera lens. Okay, so that's a little bit too much. So just... I'm not sure that's going to come through in the final video, but for some reason it keeps changing the color balance of my shot. So I apologize for that if you're actually seeing it. So I'm planning to make this a relatively chunky beard. So if you want to do something a little bit smaller, obviously you'll use less of the sculpting material. And then just make sure that it is pressed down really well on the top part here. I'm just going to use this to push it in under the hair a little bit. This is the kind of situation where having an actual sculpting tool does come in handy. Sorry. Again, trying to do this through a camera lens is not easy. Okay, so then we've got our basic shape of our beard there. A little messy, but it's a tutorial, so who cares? So you dip your tool in the water, and then you start just very lightly pulling it down like this. You're not going to put a ton of pressure on because you don't want the sculpting material to pull up from the head. In case sometimes it does anyways, but that's okay. This is just the beginning stages, so it's not that big a deal. Again, you're not putting a ton of pressure on this because you don't want to cut into the green stuff. You just want to give it some texture. And keep the sculpting tool wet, or you will end up having problems with it sticking. And then do the same thing at a slightly different angle. So the first time we were coming straight down, now we're coming sort of across. And now I'm putting a little bit more pressure on the bottom edges. Again, keeping the tool wet. And then come in, do a little bit more up near the top. And then you take a look and you see if there's any areas that look too flat or look like they need more work, you go ahead and do that. I am just going to, I see it peeling away a little bit here, so I'm just going to take my flat edge, my tool, just the edge, and push it down a little bit more so it blends in a little bit more with the skin. So this is actually coming out a little too far. So again, using the flat edge of my tool to pull that back a little bit, and then I will need to go in and redo those lines that we did. This one's a little trickier than normal because I got to try and blend it in with the hair as well. Okay, so we're going to call that done. So then what I do is to kind of tame the harshness of those lines. I wet my finger and I just, no pressure at all, just, there you go. So then that combination of the water and the very, very light, almost non-existent pressure of your finger blends things in a little bit. So then We're going to do exactly the same thing for the other side. I'm not going to bother recording it because, like I said, it is literally exactly the same thing. But then once that side's done, we'll come back and we'll talk about the other steps. Okay, so we have both sides done now. Again, the process was exactly the same for the other side. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the chin area. So wet my fingers again, pinch off a little bit of the green stuff. Like a teardrop shape. Put the top of the teardrop under his bottom lip and the rest underneath. Again, I'm trying to build a chunkier beard here, so if you're going with something more sleek, then you're going to want to use less green stuff in this kind of situation. Excuse me. And again, we're doing the exact same thing we did with the cheek areas. Very, very light. Almost no pressure. Now, I'm going to have to put a little bit of pressure there because that started to peel up. And that's all you need to do. If you see that it starts to peel up, just use part of your tool. If you're using this kind of tool, this is perfect for it. But I mean, you can also just use kind of the flat or rounded edge of this type of tool. So again, very little pressure at first because we're just trying to etch in some basic lines. And more pressure down near the bottom where we want it a little more feathered. You're going to have an easier time doing this if you're doing it in your house. I happen to be shooting this in my garage, which is not insulated or heated. And I believe it's like -6 outside, so it's not exactly conducive to working with sculpting material. Because with green stuff, and probably others, I haven't worked with anything other than green stuff in a while, but the colder it is, the colder the material is, the harder it is to work with. Yeah, see, that keeps coming up from his chin because of the temperature. So a little bit less pressure, trying to avoid that, but still etching in a little bit of some lines. Do the wet finger here. And what I'm going to do actually is, this is a little bit too chunky, so I'm going to press that in a little bit. Get a little bit more of a profile. And then again, go back to etch in my other lines. And that's how you got to think about this. You got to think about it is you're not carving or necessarily sculpting. You are etching. You got to resist the urge to put too much pressure because that will cause the green stuff to pull up. And again, almost no pressure with the water finger. Just to blend in a little bit with the cheek areas we did. And then, so there he's got his Abraham Lincoln going. Now, normally what I would do is I would let this sit for 24 hours to let this part cure before doing the mustache. However, I know for a fact this is going to be the only time I have to film for probably another 2 weeks. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the mustache as well. So just gonna go take a break and go and work the remaining green stuff for a little bit in the warmth of the house, so it makes it easier to work with. So I will be back momentarily. Okay, both I and the green stuff have warmed up a bit. So now onto the mustache. What you're going to want to do is, like we did with the beard, you're going to want to do this in multiple pieces, not just take one big string of green stuff and go like over the lip like that. You're going to want to do it in sections. So you can do one section here and then one section here. You're going to want it fairly small because their faces ain't that big. Then just kind of, again, you're going to want to put some pressure to make sure that it will actually adhere to the head. And then we're going to start exactly the same process. But in this case, instead of coming straight down, we're coming down at an angle to start with. And again, more pressure as we get lower. Sorry, speaking of lower. And we try to blend it a little bit with the beard down near the bottom. And again, more etching in the other direction to blend in with the cheek portion of the beard. And you'll have to it'll do a little bit less of the etching with the mustache, just because in reality it would be somewhat thinner. And then just, sorry, I keep moving out of frame here. I'm not used to this. So out of practice with shooting videos. And then again, the wet finger, just to kind of soften a little bit what we've done there. And then take another small amount of our green stuff. Takes a little bit more than that. The amount of green stuff you'll need is really just trial and error. You can always add more later, but I'm trying to do it all in one, and then you try and get at least somewhat similar positioning to what you had before. It doesn't need to be perfectly uniform because that's not how hair grows. And you can always, if you find that again, theoretically, you won't have the same kind of problems with it popping up that I'm having. This is because of how cold it is where I'm working. Anyways, as I was saying, you can, once this is cured, if you think you need more, you can always just go in and add another layer, another thin layer on top. You just need to make sure that you do a lot of the blending with the etching like this to make sure that it doesn't look like it's just been pasted on top. That's not looking too bad. What I will do is add a little bit more of a mustache. Not a lot though, because like I said, you don't want to add too much at one time. This, I'm just going to use the tool to really press it in. And again, I am going for more of a mountain man type beard than probably a lot of your projects would call for. I mean, unless you're trying to make a beard for a dwarf to add to your Mythic Legions shelf. If you are doing a longer beard like that, like a dwarf type beard, I would recommend doing it in layers. So start off with something like this, and then just keep adding layers until it's as long as you want. Because if you just try to do, for instance, a beard like this long, you're gonna struggle with doing the etching for the hair all the way down, because of the flexibility of the putty until it's cured. So if you do it in a layer like this and then add another layer, you've got that hardened layer behind it to kind of help you help support the new layer. Okay, so now I've completely obscured his mouth. Just do that. Okay. Sorry, I keep hitting my tripod. As I said, I'm very out of practice filming videos. Okay, so come on, there you go. So there we go. There we have a beard. A little uneven, but that's life. So what you can do, obviously, if you see, like in this situation, you see the beard is fairly close to the face there, but it's on this side, it's puffed out a little bit. I'm just going to leave mine because this is a tutorial and I'm probably never going to use this head for anything anyways. But you can always just go back and use the flat of your sculpting tool to press that in a little bit to even it out and then etch again. Like I said, the working time for this, for me in this weather, in this cold, is a lot less, but generally 45 minutes, you can still adjust what you've done with it. So there you have it. Let that cure for 24 hours, and then you can paint it up. And like I said, this is the difference that you can make. So hopefully you found that helpful, and hopefully you have a better head to use than this one. See you later.